72% to 23%. That is the ratio. Not of votes, not of court verdicts, of explanations. 72% of athletes in coded post-game interviews credited a win to their own skill, preparation, or effort. 23%, describing a loss under otherwise identical conditions, credited anything about themselves at all. The rest went to the referee, the weather, the opponent, the schedule, the universe. Same sport, same athletes, same season. The only variable that moved was whether they won. In the 1970s, a small group of social psychologists sat down to test something that seemed almost too obvious to bother measuring. Richard Lau and Dane Russell, working with archived interviews from American sports pages, wanted to confirm what basic logic already implied: that a tennis serve, a jump shot, a chess move is a genuine mixture of skill and chance, and so a rational person's explanation for the outcome should reflect that mixture consistently, win or lose. If your serve is 80% technique and 20% luck, that ratio does not reorganize itself depending on whether the ball lands in or out. The causal facts of the event do not change, only the outcome does. So the prediction, the boring, sensible, null hypothesis prediction, was that people's explanations would track the actual causal structure of the game, not the scoreboard. That prediction failed. It failed almost everywhere researchers looked. What they found instead, across dozens of post-performance interviews, was a split so consistent it started to look less like human variability and more like a fixed architectural feature. Athletes explaining a win used internal language. I read the defense well, I trained for this, I stayed focused, at rates exceeding 70%. Athletes explaining a loss, often in the very same interview format, minutes after a different game, shifted to external language. The officiating was inconsistent, the field conditions were bad, we caught a tough break, at rates often exceeding 60, sometimes 70%. The internal to external ratio didn't just shift, it inverted, and it wasn't limited to sports. Students explaining a strong exam grade cited their own preparation and intelligence. Students explaining a poor grade on the very same exam, under the very same grading rubric, cited an unfair test, a bad question set, a professor who doesn't teach what he tests. Investors, studied later in behavioral finance research through the 1980s and 90s, showed the identical asymmetry with money. Gains attributed to their own analysis and instinct, losses attributed to market volatility, unpredictable news, other traders panicking. Different domains. Same ratio, same direction. Every single time. Which raises an uncomfortable question the researchers didn't shy away from. If the causal mix of skill and luck is roughly stable across a person's games, exams, or trades, why does the story change so completely depending on whether they won? The answer isn't deception. Nobody sitting in that post-game interview is consciously constructing a lie. What's happening is closer to a filtering system operating in real time underneath conscious access, whose entire function is to protect something called the self-model, the working, continuously updated internal narrative a person carries about who they are and what they're capable of. That self-model needs coherence to function. It cannot process contradictory data every few minutes without cost. So when an outcome arrives that confirms the self-model, a win, a good grade, a profitable trade, it gets absorbed instantly, no resistance, no interrogation, filed as evidence of who this person already believes themselves to be. But when an outcome arrives that contradicts the self-model, a loss, a failure, a bad decision, the system doesn't update the model. It flags the data as anomalous and reroutes it outward to circumstance, to other people, to conditions outside the self. Not because the brain is protecting the person's reputation in front of others, because it's protecting the internal narrative from itself. This is identity maintenance operating exactly as designed. The brain is not optimizing for an accurate record. It is optimizing for a stable one. This asymmetry is running in you right now, quietly reorganizing your own history as you listen. Subscribe if you want to keep catching these patterns before they catch you. And it runs in places far more mundane than championship games and quarterly earnings calls. It runs in a performance review, where a glowing evaluation becomes proof of your work ethic, but a mediocre one becomes evidence of office politics, a manager who doesn't get it, a team that made you look bad. It runs in dating. A good first date becomes confirmation of your charm, your wit, your chemistry with another person, while a bad one becomes they clearly weren't ready for something real, a fact about them, never a data point about you. It runs in parenting, where a child's achievement gets quietly folded into the story of good parenting, consistency, values, attention, while a child's struggle gets routed to the teacher, the friend group, the school system, a phase. It runs in money, in the exact pattern the researchers documented decades ago. A winning trade is your instinct, your research, your discipline. A losing trade is the market, the volatility, the unpredictable variable nobody could have seen. Every one of these moments feels, from the inside, like ordinary reasoning. That is precisely what makes the mechanism effective. It never announces itself as bias. It only ever announces itself as an explanation. But here is where the asymmetry stops being merely interesting and starts being expensive. Learning in any biological system depends on a feedback loop. An outcome occurs, the outcome is coded internally, and the internal model adjusts based on that code. If failure is consistently coded as external, that loop never closes. The decision architecture that produced the bad trade, the failed pitch, the mismanaged conversation never receives the signal that it was the cause, so it doesn't change. The same investor, having explained away 3 consecutive losses as bad market timing, executes a 4th trade using the identical logic that produced the first 3, not because they're careless, but because internally, nothing in their model has told them anything went wrong. The same manager, having attributed every failed hire to the market for talent right now, runs the next search with the same untouched instincts. The mistake isn't just repeated, it's repeated with increasing confidence, because every success in between was fully absorbed into the self-model, while every failure was quietly discarded, meaning the internal record of how good am I actually at this becomes mathematically disconnected from the real historical record of outcomes. This is measurable. Researchers studying overconfidence in financial decision-makers found that traders with the strongest self-serving attribution patterns didn't just misjudge individual trades, they miscalibrated their entire risk tolerance, taking larger positions in subsequent bets, because their internal skill rating had been quietly inflated by a decade of half-recorded history. That inflation doesn't feel like inflation from the inside, it feels like confidence. It feels earned. Is there a name for a species that edits its own historical record in real time, continuously, without ever noticing the edit is happening? There should be, because this isn't a flaw that shows up occasionally, under stress, in weak moments. It shows up every time an outcome lands. Every game, every exam, every trade, every parenting moment, every date, sorting the incoming data before conscious awareness ever gets a vote. And it is happening again right now, in you, mid-video, as some recent win and some recent loss surface in your memory, almost involuntarily, prompted by everything you've just heard. Notice which one arrived already wearing your name and which one arrived already wearing someone else's.